Hi, this is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center for Recovery and the Radical Recovery Summit. And I'm really happy here to have Dr. Rhonda Freeman with me. And we're going to talk about neuropsychology and the brain and some of how that works with addiction. But our main focus is going to be on recovery from narcissistic abuse and what happens to us in those kinds of relationships. So, welcome, Rhonda.
Thank
And
you, Lynn, for having me.
oh, yeah, you're very welcome. So
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about your work and how
Yeah,
you got to what you're doing now. What's your interest in that
yeah.
and how you got here?
Well, with respect to the narcissistic abuse angle, I'd been a neuropsychologist for like a decade before I got into that. And what brought me in that direction is having my own relationship with someone who I suspect is a psychopath, but being on that spectrum.
Mhm.
And it really sort of tore my life apart for a couple of years before I could feel I was getting back to me, before I understood all that was happening. I didn't realize I was traumatized. I didn't realize I was in an abusive relationship. And then after I made those realizations, I decided to use neuropsychology to help me get my brain sort of back on track. And after I was able to do that, I thought, okay, I can go back to being the neuropsychologist, doing my brain trauma work and my stroke work. But I thought, if it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody. And I actually give evaluations to narcissists at least like a couple times a week. And
Oh,
so, and
okay.
I, so I do that as a job. And so I thought, gosh, I got to help other people who, don't do this as a job, but think it's them, and they'll stay and stay. So yeah, that's what got me into my own personal pain and trauma. Yeah.
Mhm. So when you look at that, do you feel like there's so I guess it's kind of a two-part question. So
That's
one
okay.
is there something about our backgrounds, our trauma
Mhm.
backgrounds, or our maybe the brain chemistry, the
Mhm.
neurobiology, the neural networks that makes us vulnerable to narcissists? And then as we get further into our talk, I'd love to talk about how you use the brain to actually heal.
Oh
But
yeah,
maybe
yeah,
we could start
definitely.
with, do you feel like there's a
Mhm.
vulnerability there to start, or why is it that we're vulnerable
Um,
to those
I
people?
do think there's a vulnerability. And I want to be really careful to walk a line. There's a difference between vulnerability and it's your fault. That it's not
Mm,
necessarily our fault. Because narcissists are attracted to everybody. You look at their partners, they get with other narcissists, they get with psychopaths, they get with people who are great, they get people who are awful. But there is a certain population that will stay with them perhaps a little bit longer. And it's the population that tends to be very empathic and forgiving and who may have had some trauma in their own past. And so, because of that, they can see some of the pains of the narcissist and feel badly for them.
mhm.
And so I think that maybe that group is a bit more vulnerable, but that they didn't bring it on themselves, of course not, but they're definitely more vulnerable in my opinion.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at this really serious issue of we don't
Yeah.
see, and that was the case for me too. I never saw what was really going on until I was actually out of it. I was
Mm-hmm.
starting to get glimpses, over time, but
Mm-hmm.
what's going on there? Why is it that we
Yeah.
can't see what's going on?
Yeah. Oh, there's so much going on there. Yeah, for me, I tagged his pathology while I was in the middle of the relationship. I go, oh my God, this guy's a psychopath. This isn't good. Like I've never seen one this close. Like actually in my life, I'd seen one while I'm sitting across the desk, doing evaluations, and I know, okay, that's what I'm dealing with. Then I realized I have one in my home, in my life. Um, and and what's going on there, which keeps us there, is what maybe you're asking,
Mhm.
is that we get connected just like we will with any other person. When we go through a relationship, we have systems of our brain that allow us to be attracted to and connect to another person. And they work when we're even with somebody who's a psychopath or a narcissist. And so I got bonded to this person. And the really odd thing about narcissists and psychopaths is that they don't show you all the nastiest or dirtiest or meanest parts of themselves when they first get with you. They're pretty great. They can
Right.
be likable people. That's how they are able to get into a relationship, because they can be fun and funny and talented and brilliant. And so we're attracted to those things just like we would be any other man or woman. But the thing is, when they shift and they change into this other person, you're bonded at that point. And so when you're bonded to somebody, what do? Well, for example, my son or daughter, anything going on with them, I want to help them. I'll have their back. I care about them. And
Mhm.
you do the same thing with that narcissistic person. It creates what psychologists have called the traumatic bond.
Mhm.
Dutton came up with it a long time ago. Then another researcher kind of took it and morphed it and also put it into their own words. So two different groups of people are describing the traumatic bond, and that's when you are connected to somebody who is both sort of intermittently damaging to you, mean to you, cruel to you, but also kind of nice to you. And then that person has some power in the relationship. And so you're sort of stuck in this sort of odd connection, and other people looking at it go, that guy's awful to you. Why, what are you doing? Like, why are you still with this person? And so that's one of the things. There's so many other things. Rejection. They often use a lot of rejection in the relationship. And I don't mean like maybe overt rejection, like don't come near me kind of thing, but they give little put downs of you where you feel like you're being rejected by them. Like I can walk into the room and, oh, you're wearing that, or you didn't spend any time on your hair today, or like just always little put downs, little jabs. So I could never feel like accepted by this person because
Mhm.
they were always looking at what's wrong with you. And rejection, as we know, when it comes to the brain, is it activates our bonding system of all things, right? It activates our bonding and connection system, and it actually makes us more connected and more focused on the person doing the rejection. My theory is that happens because I guess back in the days where we were like living among lions and tigers and bears, if your social group rejected you, that could be life or death for you. And so
Right.
hence you have to really pay attention to make sure you get back in too so that you're safe. And so we have all these old brain systems at work that in the
Right.
modern times really work against us. As a matter of fact, I wrote an article for Psychology Today called The Brain Works Against Abuse Victims, because it really does. And if
Yeah.
you want, we'll get into some of that a little bit later. But it makes it so hard to disconnect because of the way it's built with all these older structures. And the newer structure, the prefrontal cortex, it does all the logic and the reasoning for us. It takes a back seat to those systems. And that's the very structures that tell you, no, you know what, leave, let's go, and we're done. So that's a
Right.
huge answer, I know, and I only touched on two things that keep us tied in these relationships. There's more. There's even, more than that.
Right.
Mhm.
So as I'm listening, I'm thinking about disorganized attachment or
Mm.
detachment as children. How does that play?
Mhm. Yeah, attachment styles with respect to being in these relationships, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think attachment styles matter a great deal. But the only thing is that even someone with a secure attachment style can wind up staying in these relationships. They can actually start to develop within the relationships an insecure attachment style with that person. Because our attachment styles can change. It can be a certain way with one person, another way with another person. You
Mhm.
walk in, I'm feeling just very secure, comfortable, attached. I feel fine. But if my narcissistic or psychopathic ex were to walk in the room, you'd probably see a totally different part of me. Like, well, what is she like? Why is she behaving this way? She doesn't seem so confident. She seems scared. She seems nervous. She's paying attention too much to him. So our attachment styles kind of morph based upon the person we're around, which is obviously associated with the brain. It kind of shifts into more of a survival mode. Obviously, for children who never had a chance, that's a whole different scenario because certain brain structures for them don't get a chance to develop properly. And hence, they are left sort of at the mercy of a survival system that they just carry into adulthood that they rely on for most of their functioning. Hence, you see complex PTSD, and they're just more reactive to the environment,
Mhm.
which is, yeah, a really hard place to be.
So do you work with people who've been raised by a narcissistic parent?
Well, my work, my actual job is I give evaluations for people who might have ADHD, Alzheimer's, stroke, brain trauma. So I'm solely in a neurology practice. I actually don't practice psychology. So
Yeah.
I've not been trained in therapy. I don't give therapy.
Mhm.
So no, I don't work with that
Yeah.
population.
So part of what you've been learning about this then is just based on your own experience in life and wanting to really apply what you already know about neuroscience to
Mhm.
what's
This
happening
population,
to
exactly.
this population.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've had some great because I've been doing this for 10 years though in this whole narcissistic space. So
Right.
it's not like I've just kind of, read a couple of books, whatever. I had a chance to really interview, for example, some neuroscientists who actually do this for a living, like Michael Koenig. He's a neuroscientist at University of Wisconsin. He's actually responsible for a great deal of the research that we know about psychopaths, because he and his partner would actually take MRI portable ones to prisons and pop the psychopath in there. And that's how we know what we know about the brain of psychopaths from his work.
Mhm.
And so, and then I used to work for Aftermath Surviving Psychopathy, which is a group by Dr. Robert Hare. He's the one who made the book Without Conscience. And so I put myself in circles of people who really, really, really know this topics, because I wanted to make sure if I was going to learn it, that I learned it from people, who kind of lead the field. And I appreciate them so much. And then after that, of course, I did a great deal of journal reading. And then obviously I work with, as you know, I said psychopaths and narcissists when I do my ADHD evaluations. And so when I do those are about 6 hours long. And, you really get a flavor for the brain of a narcissist or psychopath working with them that much for that
Mhm.
long. So yeah, so that's my background with them.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So what's the link between ADHD and psychopath?
Psychopathy. Yeah. There's some research that some say none, but there's some research that says that's not true. That, for example, when you have ADHD children who have the coexisting oppositional defiant disorder or the conduct disorder, there's been research to show that they can actually segue into adults who are antisocial. And of course, as you know, antisocial has within it psychopathy. And so it's kind of always been there. It's just, of course, you don't call a child a psychopath or antisocial. And so the link is that some of the same brain regions are implicated with ADHD and psychopathy. A prefrontal cortex is not quite functioning the way it should be with regard to regulation. And then some of those children with ADHD, clearly, not all at all, not all, but some of those children, they have the self-regulation problems on the emotional end of things, where there is a coldness, a callousness. And so that's where the link comes in. When it comes to narcissistic personality disorder, the ones that have more the hyperactive style are the ones research is saying have more than narcissistic personality disorder features when they grow up, when they get older. So yeah, same brain regions, just we call it different things. I think perhaps we as society want to make sure we're not saying names that are so hurtful to a child by imposing on a child, but it's the same brain, pretty much same condition, just adulthood versus um, childhood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, One of my nephews was born with profound damage in his brain. He really never developed a prefrontal cortex.
Oh, oh no.
And it was really, he suffered a lot, and he was heavily medicated too, and he had a really tough time of things.
Oh,
But one of the
so
things
sorry.
that, yeah, I know, it was really hard. He knew that he shouldn't yell at somebody,
Oh,
that he would get in trouble if he did that.
okay.
But it was just, that what was coming up in his brain was so difficult and in his whole system. And yet he was also the sweetest, most loving person at times too.
Oh, good, good.
So it was a funny thing though, because you look at
Mhm,
when he was medicated a certain way, then
mhm,
the love could be there.
mhm.
And when he wasn't, it was this other stuff would kind of take over.
Wow.
And it's so our brains really determine
Oh,
what
yeah,
life we have.
absolutely. And then, as you said, mentioned medication on top of that, that can change so much. It dulls certain regions and then amplify other regions. So, who knows what he was going through.
Mhm, mhm. What are you seeing in your field of
Mhm.
neuroscience and, especially as it's applied to people's lives? That you work in the area of narcissism, and
Yeah.
you also work in this other area too, where you're
Yeah.
diagnosing people. What do you think of the whole field of neuroscience and psychology, and where we're headed?
Oh, well. I mean, I think it's everything. I think it's everything, but I think that it should be used more in therapy.
Mhm,
And so, like, for example, I work for another practice. It's more of a psychology practice, but I only do neuropsych there too,
mhm,
and we have therapists there. And I love it when we share a patient. A therapist shares a patient with me. So I'll see the patient first, and then I recommend the patient have therapy because I don't do therapy. And so, which means the patient usually signs off and lets them have a copy of the evaluation. And so at that point, I then do a consult with the therapist and say, look, this is the limit. These are the limitations we're dealing with. This is what I think you should approach him because of how his brain works. And so they always get the same feedback, like, wow, like if we could just get that kind of approach for before we saw every patient, it'd be so helpful. And so
Mhm.
I wish that what would happen is that not that they got trained to be neuropsychologists, these therapists, but they got mixed into their curriculum a lot more neuroscience. And but neuroscience just the part that they need, like not all that I had to go through, but the parts they need, which would be the parts regarding how the prefrontal cortex works and how there's various ways problems with that area show up. It's not just one way, I mean, there's ADHD, there's so many other ways it shows up. And
Mhm.
so if they got education on that, it would make therapy make so much more sense. And also it would prevent therapists who work with trauma victims from re-traumatizing their patient. Because if they understood what was happening in the brain, they would understand by telling the person, let's talk about this, what happened again and again and again. You would know you were not helping the person with that. You're hurting the person with that. And I liken it to if a child had something really horrible just happen to them. Would you sit and tell that child, okay, tell me what happened and tell me again and tell me again and tell me again? You wouldn't. You would have the sensitivity to know that you would be destroying that child by doing that. And it's the same thing with adults. So the one thing I wish that society would know and our field would know is to incorporate neuroscience in there. It would really help you better help your patient. And then I explained to her what narcissistic abuse was because it was to my surprise she didn't know. And so, yeah, I talked to her about that, and then I was able to explain to her what it was, the different brain areas that are involved with her, and what were the most prominent psych features for. 'Cause I also do psychological evaluations, obviously, and so I was explaining to her the most prominent psychological features of that patient, so that she could really just hone in and focus on those first. So in that way, the therapist got to see, okay, what I should do first, what to work with on this person first, and she also got the chance to already have the other person examine and diagnose for her. And so she sort of had a head start. And nowadays with insurances, you don't get many visits. So they need to be used, properly.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So what's the short kind of explanation for what is narcissistic abuse? How do you spot it? Like,
Oh,
what kinds
yeah.
of things would you have
Mhm.
outlined for her?
Yeah. When it comes to that term, it's not really a term that's recognized in the field of psychology. We kind of just like across the past few years made it up.
Okay.
But it was made up for good reason because it really highlights a very specific type of trauma. It's not like rape. It's not like child abuse. It's a type of trauma where you voluntarily walked into a relationship and fell in love with somebody, and because of that person's pathology, because they can't consistently keep a relationship, and because they have faulty neuropathology associated with their bonding and connection system, which is called paralimbic system of the brain, and morality. They cannot be moral. This person morphs into who they really are after the relationship sort of takes off. And so you've voluntarily gotten into a relationship with somebody like that, who then starts pummeling on you emotionally, maybe even physically. And hence, I think that's a very unique relationship, very unique form of trauma. And so, yeah, I understand, and I definitely use that word narcissistic abuse. So the neurobiology of it, I think, is huge. I kind of created the neurobiology of it because I was a victim. And so what I did was I described my own brain. But I didn't just describe and say, okay, this is how it is because of my own brain. Then I had just a wonderful opportunity to be able to communicate with thousands of survivors and victims over the past decade. And they were fitting that exact same pattern. And then that's when I said, okay, I'm ready to put it out there and say, this is what I think it is. And so I think that it's an overactivation of certain systems of the brain and underactivation of a couple of systems. Underactivation of our self-regulation system, not the whole thing, but a portion of it, the prefrontal cortex. Overactivation of our bonding system, overactivation of the reward system, overactivation of the pain system, and overactivation of two of our stress systems, and underactivation of a component of our cognitive system. So our ability to remember, ability to feel motivated, ability to feel organized and say, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that, or feel like in the motivation as in, okay, you know what? I know it's good for me to go out and take a walk or go to the gym. But once you're traumatized, you don't, that motivation just like plummets. You don't want to do anything. It's like you feel like you can't even be your own advocate at all because you're just so beat down. And so those are our major systems of our brain. We have several, but those are major ones, and they're all going haywire in different directions simultaneously. And this is why I believe that narcissistic abuse is so unique, and it needs somebody who understands it to help you.
Right. Yeah, because otherwise you could waste a lot of time on things that
Mhm.
aren't really relevant.
And that's a great point that you raised, because when it happened to me, as I said, I'm not a therapist. And so I'm in the medical world just churning out these neuropsych evaluations. So I thought, I'm gonna go to a psychologist and she's gonna know exactly what to do and help me. And I went to her, and she first off, she says, I don't like the fact that you're tagging him a diagnosis. Don't do that. She goes, that's not necessary. And I go, okay, but I'm a psychologist. It's like, okay, I won't get the diagnosis. And she then proceeded to have me try to rehash all the scenarios where he had me feeling the most sad or the most scared. I mean, my guy was a psychopath, so he was an intimidator. He was a scary figure, and so I would always leave out of there just crying and shaking, and I needed a few days to get myself back together, and then I would dread her appointment the next week. I'm like,
Mhm.
here we go again. And so I used to ask her, like, why, where are we gonna, is this gonna stop? Is this pain gonna stop? Because you're making me feel like worse. And she's like, no, we want to get it out. We want to get, and I thought to myself, that's when it clicked, like, that's not how the brain works. It doesn't have a bucket get it out system. We have a activation deactivation system. She's activating my pain. This is not the best approach. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I wasted a year,
Mhm.
almost a year going to her for no reason.
Yeah. That's too bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a year that you were in that relationship?
No, the year
Right.
after.
Right.
I'd already left. I didn't recognize myself. I didn't understand I had, symptoms of PTSD and all that. And so I went to her to try to get help, and she told me this was a really bad breakup, and that for some reason I'm having trouble accepting the breakup. And I was
Oh,
trying to explain, no, but I don't like him. She goes, yeah, but you're focused on him. Now I understood that's called traumatic bonding, when you don't like somebody, but you're still attached. I kept telling her,
yeah.
I don't even like this guy. Like, I think it's disgusting, but for some reason I can't get him out of my head. And she's like, yeah, you're having trouble just letting go. And I thought, okay.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Wow.
those are reasons
Yeah.
that I think that incorporating neuroscience in the curriculum, or not even, for those who are out of school already, then for, the CE credits, you got to make it part of what you do, because you are treating the brain. And whether or not you believe it, if you're a therapist, you are treating the brain. Like, you are.
Yeah.
So at
Yeah. Yeah.
least get a good understanding of it.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, it kind of feels like a bit of the dark ages,
Mhm.
in psychology when people aren't really aware of the brain. And now there's
Uh,
so much more about the nervous system
yeah.
and how does the nervous system fit in with all of this and attachment
Oh,
and I
yeah.
know that, talk therapy it's been really clear for a while that it's not just talk therapy that we need. We need other
Mm-hmm.
things too. Yeah.
Yep.
Do
100% right. Yep.
do you wanna talk a little bit about dance and movement? And,
Mm.
I see you were a cheerleader in the NFL for a
Yay!
while. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. I was with the Miami Dolphins and the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah, movement is so important. I saw you had some experts who are experts in that area. So, like, my little take, I'll keep mine very short, because your viewers can watch the other ones who, like, pioneered, this area. Turn it off. So sorry about that. But yeah, dance is really important, because um, one, it allows for certain neurochemistry to get released when we move,
Mhm.
and two, it activates the prefrontal cortex, and that's really important for people who are in the midst of trauma, because that's the area of the brain that's going to kind of save you. When that
Uh,
part is up, it's your regulator, it's your calmer, and it knows what to do when it's properly connected to its other areas. It will know what to do. You have to do nothing. So, as a matter of fact, if you're feeling calm right now, that is your prefrontal cortex doing its job. And you're not having to do anything about it, it's just doing it. But
right.
after you're traumatized, you can feel constantly on edge, just not yourself, even the opposite direction, numb. I remember feeling that I couldn't access joy, and that made me cry, So I'm like, where's the joy? Because
Mhm.
I'd always been such a joyful, happy, bubbly person rather. I was fun to be with, and I loved to be with other people genuinely. And during that time period, I wanted none of that. It was just like I just was numb. And then when I was finally got the motivation to move and dance again, and it was choreographed dance, I would get like little videos and I would watch those and do the choreography, and I just started to feel so much better. And so, I look back and it was because I was activating my prefrontal cortex. I was giving it what it needs. It's better than sitting and telling someone, okay, well, last month he did this to me and then he said that and it made me so scared. And it does a world of difference, in
Right.
comparison to those two things. One hurts you, one makes you better. It makes your brain better.
Mhm. Yeah, last year I interviewed James Gordon, who does, this with huge groups of people, like 1,000 people, who get them doing shaking and dancing,
Oh
and
wow.
and I'm just like, "Wow."
Yes.
That
It
seems
is
like
powerful.
it's powerful, but it felt kinda scary to me when he first started talking about it. I'm like, "How do you control all that energy that
That's
people?" The
fantastic. I
point
would
isn't
love
that
to
you
be
have to
there.
control it.
Ah,
Yeah, but I started doing it,
good.
I practice every day almost for quite a few months, and I
Oh.
should probably start it up again because I loved it so much. So the
How did you
shaking,
feel with it? How did you
I just felt so alive,
Yeah.
and the shaking was so good because it kinda gets everything out and gets you
Yes.
moving, but then the
Yes.
dance was so creative,
Mhm.
and I live in the forest, so I could go out in the forest
Oh,
in this clearing where nobody could see me, and I'd put on the
yeah.
tunes and
That's so nice. Oh,
yeah.
and your environment. I'm jealous. Oh, I would do anything to be in the forest. So.
Yeah, it's really nice to have that
Oh.
nature. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Nature's so important for the brain.
And I noticed you have a dance kind of hip hop video on your website.
Like I just want to give an example of watching someone do choreography and yeah, just doing a choreography, yeah, moves. I had nothing to do with that video. I just found it on YouTube and it's shareable. So yeah.
Oh, right, right,
Yeah, put that as, hey, start with this. Or if you love country, then of course go find a country one. Yeah, like whatever you want to do.
right,
And
right.
I think also music is really important too. I like the combination of the two because music activates the brain in so many ways. It's one of the things that can be very healing for the brain. I mean, I don't know if you knew that for Gabby Gifford, the senator.
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
she yeah. So she was unfortunately she was shot in the head and she couldn't speak. And part of her treatment, they use music to treat her
Hmm.
because she could not formulate words. So I saw this recording, for example, where they had her repeat a word and she could not say the word, just couldn't. And they said the word, she tried to say it, couldn't say it. So the therapist got out her guitar and started playing This Little Light of Mine. And Gabby just started saying, Let It Shine. And they were like, okay.
Oh,
Because music is sort of handled by many, many different parts of the brain, whereas our language is just left frontal, which is,
oh,
and if that part isn't there, you can't formulate words. Whereas music is all over, it's right side, it's left side. And so it grabbed it, and she knew what the song was, and she wanted so badly to do it, and it came out.
yeah,
And so that's how they used neuroplasticity was used, the approach was used to help activate neural pathways that got her speaking again. And now she can formulate sentences more than words, she can
right,
speak. Yeah.
right. Wow,
So music is so
that's great.
powerful
Yeah.
for our mood as well.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And one of the things you mentioned too is that choreographed dance is good because then we have to think as well.
Yeah, yeah. I like to take it up a notch. So yeah, that's why I say choreographed because you have to you're then now you're bringing in your hippocampus, which is memory. And one of the things, as we know, with things like PTSD, conditions like PTSD, it really impacts the hippocampus of the brain. There's
Right,
been studies that show that it starts to shrink, and then hence that means later in life, even just the normal age changes that everybody will experience, no matter what your memory changes with age, they will have even more profound memory changes because they didn't start at the regular level. They've been so impacted by trauma, the hippocampus starts to atrophy. And so I wanted to person, if you're going to do dance, do something that's going to activate a lot of different brain areas. So why not bring in choreography? So you have to remember. Visual spatial skills are brought into that. Timing is brought into that. So yeah, I want to make it a little complex. So I said do choreography dance. But if that's too much, start off with just moving your body, just getting into it, just feeling
right,
it.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you keep coming back to the prefrontal cortex as being really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the prefrontal cortex. I love it so much. Back in school, my professor for my birthday brought me a book called The Handbook of the Frontal Lobes. It was my favorite book I ever, because I was so in love. He said, I've never seen somebody love the frontal lobes more than you. So I've been in love with that section of the brain since I was in my 20s. So yeah, love it.
Wow. So what does that section of the brain do for us?
Oh, so much. Okay. So it's involved in sort of keeping us calm, monitoring behavior, regulating our emotions. It has very strong connections with our limbic system. Our limbic system is for people who don't know, the emotional system of the brain. And it keeps kind of a handle on that. It keeps you from getting too anxious, because sometimes there can be nothing really to be anxious about, but then you're feeling, really nervous. That part of the brain keeps that system kind of calm. It's involved in morality. It's involved in empathy. Wow. It's involved in shifting from one thought to the next. Have you ever been like such that you can't get a thought out of your mind, ruminating, intrusive thoughts? There's sort of a gear shifter called the anterior cingulate cortex. That kind of is a tie between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. This guy's like right in there. And if that part is having trouble, you'll find yourself having these intrusive thoughts being shot into your head, and you think, oh my God, I don't want to think about it, or ruminating, chewing over a thought over and over and over. And you're like, my gosh, I can't shift out of this. Well, the prefrontal cortex handles all of that. It's our personality.
Mhm.
So it keeps us from behaving inappropriately. We know how to behave in certain social situations. Like if I have a patient come in and they are, like if it was a man, let's say, and they'll make a sexual comment, right away I know, okay, something's going on with his frontal lobes. So I'm kind of like on alert for, let's see what other evidence I get, because that's completely inappropriate. We know that you don't walk into a doctor's office and make a sexual comment.
Right.
So it's our frontal lobes that handle that. I evaluate a great deal of frontal temporal dementia. And one of the sad things about that is that a lot of times the other doctors will misdiagnose it. Not our practice. Our practice knows what they're doing, but other doctors, like primary care doctors, because of frontal temporal dementia often can look like a psychological disorder. It can look like the person's just very anxious, or the person's just sort of, I don't know, stressed out. And so by the time we get them and the neurologist goes, ooh, something going on here, I do the neuropsych, the neurologist does his stuff, and we realize, okay, we're dealing with a frontal temporal dementia. So that will change a person's personality. It will make them very focused on, like, believe it or not, eating a lot of junk food, sort of lack of control of self. The frontal lobes are associated with our speech. I could just go on and on. It has so many different roles. So depending upon the section of the brain of the rather the frontal lobes is what handles the different jobs. Concentration, what's called working memory. Working memory is like when you do mental math. You like say, I don't know, 87 times 12. We got to remember what you carry and what, that's
Uh,
the working memory system doing
mm,
that. So
mm.
yeah, it does a lot.
There's a lot. Yeah.
Hmm.
So if we were to tie that in with childhood trauma, so
Yeah.
someone has maybe abuse, but maybe more on the neglect side, they're just not connected with, they're not seen,
Mm.
um, but maybe abuse too. So what kind of impact does that have on the development of that part of the brain?
It has a great deal of impact, because if there's any fear for that person, or I mean, as a child, we need love. We all need love. But
Mhm.
so there's going to be that hunger for love, and you're not getting it. So the prefrontal cortex doesn't quite develop as it should. So it doesn't become the regulator that it's supposed to be. And so other areas, like the older areas, are going to develop no matter what. The survival system is going to just keep on doing its thing. And so we might see for those individuals as adults, they might be more reactive. They may be more prone to feel depressed, feel anxious, maybe turn to substances to soothe themselves, because the internal soother, which is this guy here, the prefrontal cortex, isn't doing the soothing. So they need something external to make them feel okay, I feel whole now. And their choice of what they choose to fill that void could be anything external. It could be just maybe using other people in a sexual way. It could be anything. And then also we have an oxytocin system. That system is highly dependent upon it being activated throughout the lifespan. And so there's been studies that show that a person who's neglected as a child does not have as many other proper receptors. And so if they, let's say, get love when they get older, they may not be as receptive, or it may not be received in the same way as someone who was given love their whole life, because that system's up and running and fine. But this person didn't have that system never really got a chance to be used properly. So even though oxytocin is generated, the impact is not as profound on them. So
Right.
they may not be so comfy cozy with the hug from somebody. Like the hug may not mean as much. Someone said, "Oh, let me give you a hug and you feel better," and they don't feel better. Like, what is that about?
I was reading something recently about looking for comfort from other people. And when you ask someone to, visualize a time you feel safe or something, quite
Mm,
often people will think of a person or an animal. But
yeah,
then there's a whole subset of people who will think about nature,
yeah.
because it doesn't
Oh,
really occur to us
mm-hmm,
that we would get comforted that people are trustworthy, or,
mm-hmm.
which is really sad.
It is so sad. It's heartbreaking. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And yet our brains seem to really collect the evidence
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh
keep it.
yeah, it keeps
Mm,
it. It keeps
yeah.
it. It's interesting that you say that, because a lot of my patients are in one practice I work at, they're in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And they've never seen a psychologist a day in their life. So they're nervous wreck when they're coming to see me, because they think that, am I crazy? Is that why I'm being sent to you? And I go, no, of course not. You're not crazy.
Right.
This is gonna be fun. We're gonna enjoy ourselves. We're gonna do some testing. And then once they get to sort of trust me, and then they start letting things out. And sometimes they'll say something like, they'll tell me about an abuse in the past. They ask me, why am I holding on to this? I'm 70 years old. Like, I've been miserable with this my whole life. Like, what is wrong with me that I didn't let it go? And they actually carried that as their responsibility. So I'd have to explain to them, it literally is not voluntary. Like, we have sections of the brain that holds that. And so I go into explaining why it holds that. And they're so shocked that, wow, like they didn't do this, the whole time. But unfortunately, we're also getting messages from family saying, like, let it go already. It happened
Right.
years ago. You were 20 years old. It's
Yeah.
over.
Right.
And so it sounds like a societal thing that we're being told that you can let go of trauma. And so back to the education thing, there's like, it's great. Let's teach kids calculus, but also let's teach them about people. Like just throughout the let's say maybe 6th through 12th grade, make sure we incorporate that we're teaching them about how people are made, so that we're not out there traumatizing someone even more by telling them, "Oh my gosh, let go of it. It happened 15 years ago."
Right.
That kind of thing is so painful. Yeah.
Yeah. And so much shame.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. She definitely, I mean, the person I'm thinking of, she felt so much shame. She was even afraid to tell me, because she thought,
Right.
like, God, what are you going to think of me if I tell you that I've been holding on to this? And I'm like, no. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So does brain science tell us how to help people work with those kinds of stuck trauma experiences?
Yes, it does.
So what kinds of things
Um,
would
Now, I don't
would
work with the treatment end, but like, for example, doctors like Bessel van de Kolk, he talks a great deal about how they're using neurofeedback to help individuals. There are brain game strategies. I will definitely stand behind those, because when I got treatment, that's what I used. I didn't do the neurofeedback, but I did the brain trainings. And
Mhm.
within a year, I'm not kidding, I was back to me. I was like, wow, like I couldn't believe,
Wow.
because I was going through life. I was doing my job, and I almost was happy when I came to work, because I'm like, God, at least at work, I don't have to think I'm not about me, because I can definitely throw myself into a case, a patient, and it was just like I was on. And then when 5 o'clock rolled around, I'm like, oh my
Uh,
here we go, back to me, like what am I gonna do with her.
yeah.
And so I did the brain trainings for a year, and I was just like so shocked. So I went back into to see what the literature was still saying about it, because when I got trained to be a neuropsychologist, I got trained also to do cognitive rehabilitation and treatment with brain trauma stroke patients. So I did that for a few years. And like I didn't get the bright idea to do it on myself until
Oh.
until a year after I tried traditional psychology with my psychologist. It was only then that I was desperate. And I thought, you know what? It worked for them, and when I was working with them, let me try it for me. Even though I'm not brain injured, I'm injured in another way.
Mhm.
And so yeah, so brain trainings are really great. And you definitely, when I saw your work, you've interviewed people who definitely take the somatic interventions. That's not my area of expertise, but clearly the research shows that that works,
Mhm.
with respect to paying attention to, um, the impact that trauma has on the body and working with the body versus just sitting and doing talk therapy with the
Right.
person, talking about what happened.
Right.
So, and again, I'll say to everybody, I'll leave you all to look at those videos because those are the experts on the somatic interventions, not me.
Right.
And then, neural pathways, just understanding, I think for me was really important to understand what neural pathways were being activated in certain ways. That's how I ended up living my life. But I don't know if everybody else can do this because I just know that I pay attention. If I'm around a person, I'm sorry, certain people, and I feel like, my body's being activated in a certain way, or there's a certain system of my brain that just feels like it's just hijacking my frontal lobes right now. Like, what is going on? I know, whoa, pay attention to that person. That's something about that person. I can't have them in my environment, or I can't trust them, even though they're wearing the most beautiful smile and being so sweet. But something's not right. So I've learned to give so much attention to what my body and my brain is telling me. I trust that so much more now, whereas before I would trust what the person said to me, or maybe what they were showing me at that moment, versus even though the red flags are going off right and left in my
Yeah.
body.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, so I think those are ways that we can blend psychology and neurology together
Right.
with regard to
So
treatment.
if someone wanted to do some of the brain training, where would they look to find those kinds of
Mm.
programs?
Yeah, I use a professional one most of the time, but that's just because I had access to it because of my job. You can also go to a neuropsychologist who does this.
Mhm.
So find somebody like that. There are commercially available games. I've not used them like Lumosity and like Brain HQ. I think Brain HQ is pretty good. But those are commercially available. We're talking self-care healing where, I'm not saying use Brain HQ in place of seeing a actual neuropsychologist. Like that's
Right.
not what I'm saying. I'm saying that when you want to do the doing something every day to work on your brain on your own in conjunction with somebody else overseeing it, then do something like that.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, if you find yourself just doing problem solving type games, those will activate your prefrontal cortex.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. They're good for our brains. Our brains need to work.
really do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you need to activate those neural pathways of regulation, which will let the limbic system know, okay, things are calm, things are good, and we're safe. And then the frontals will do its job. Under real emergencies, you're not going to prevent the limbic system from being activated. If there truly is an emergency, something going wrong, believe me, the limbic system will jump into action. It'll
Right.
override that prefrontal cortex. It's got your back always. I'm
Always.
talking about when it's running the show and you're just simply sitting watching TV, or you're trying to have a dinner with, your family and you're feeling like on edge and a nervous wreck and miserable. That's
Right.
not the time for that system to be running the show.
No. No. I think it's really good to know what our different systems are and what they do
Hmm.
and what's appropriate. For
Yeah.
myself, what I found was that I had a lot of trauma as a teenager. And then the first kind of in my mid 20s, I got into the first relationship where I felt like this person really loved me and
Hmm.
really wanted to protect me. And that was all so new to me. And that's what made me so vulnerable to
Hmm.
the emotional abuse that I just couldn't see it. And
Yeah.
so for me, I think it was a long term kind of a freeze state.
Hmm.
And then just I was vulnerable to that because I hadn't had it
Hadn't
before.
had it. Yeah.
And so I can look back at that now and see, wow, I stayed in that relationship a long time. And I can see why.
Hmm.
But I also wish I hadn't wasted so much time, in a way. But
But
it's
you
not like
learned. Yeah.
I learned, and it's not
Yeah.
voluntary. It's like our nervous system is
Mm-mm.
just saying,
It's
it's
not
that trauma
voluntary.
bonding thing you talked about at the beginning.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he was
Mhm.
good to you at some point, right? He was nice to you.
Yeah, it was a woman actually,
Yeah.
but yeah, she was.
Mhm.
And I felt like, we were a team and we were working together and
Mhm.
and I had all of those romantic ideas about that. And then I couldn't really see what was really going on. So the power of denial to me is
Oh yeah.
pretty
I was there too.
massive.
I know what you mean. Yep.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah.
Totally.
So let's talk a little bit about the program that you have that you offer
Oh yeah.
on your website for people. What
Yeah.
can you just describe what that is and who might be
Mhm.
interested?
Yeah, it's for people who you definitely have to love science
Okay.
because it is really heavily science. Because I want to make sure that you get why you're behaving this way. Because I want to knock out that shame, like feelings like you had no control in this. Because this is how the brain operates. It is just what it does, and you can't shut those parts off no matter what you do. And so I describe the neuroscience behind each one of the brain systems that I talked to you about earlier. And I
Mhm.
also give an example of what it looks like in narcissistic abuse. So, but I start off giving a scenario. Okay, this is this person, she's going through this, and this is a system that's being impacted. Before all that, though, there's a questionnaire and it'll ask for before each system, do you have any of the following? So I'll have to check off and see because that system may not be activated for them. For me, all those systems were activated. But if it's activated
Right.
for them, they may pay a little extra attention because then after they get all the education about it, then there's a section about this is what you can do about it from a self-care perspective. But also then I talk about if you get within a professional, this is what they should be focusing on with you as well. And so we go
Oh,
system by system doing all of that. Then at the
okay.
end, I have a discussion of some of the myths. Like there's a big myth of that only people who are codependent get with narcissists only, and
Oh,
that's an extreme oversimplification of psychology and people. I mean, if I wish people were that simple, my job would be a piece of cake. Oh, this and that. No, there's
yeah.
this, and it could be that, it could be that, it could be that. I mean, it's so many different, I mean, so who knows? So I have a section where I talk about let's not oversimplify and slap labels on things. And I talk about what you mentioned, the attachment, how profound and powerful, personally powerful our attachment system is and how it changes and all that. So the course is for
Mm,
people who have experienced narcissistic abuse and they want to know what happened. They want to know how their brain changed, and they want to know how to move forward and what they should do from a self care perspective to move forward. And so there are parts that are heavily focused on neuroplasticity, because I also talk about that too.
okay.
Yeah.
So what are a few of the things that people might learn around taking care of themselves and healing from that?
Yeah. So, for example, some people are still going through the trauma bond. They're recently out of the relationship, and they are like writing me and saying that I cannot stand this man, this woman, and yet every morning I wake up with them in my head. Every night I wake up with them in
Mhm.
my head. I'm actually thinking of spying on them. I look at their social media. And so I have like a trauma bond book in the course,
Mm,
booklet rather, like a workbook.
mhm.
And so it gives different strategies of what a person can do to get clear about the two sides this person has. So for example,
Um,
you said that your partner, she had some great parts to her and you felt like you had a partnership with her, but at the same time you felt like this person was abusive to you. And
mm,
so the brain actually looks at those two things as being in a conflict. And so since it can't resolve the conflict, it's like, well, we're just going to be connected, and you're connected, but it is the worst thing to be. But so I try to help them resolve that conflict through various exercises in the book so
uh,
that they can, if they can resolve the conflict, then there will be no bond because you're now will can see the person for who they really are. It's kind of like breaking denial. You see the person for who they really are versus holding on to the fact that they may have been a good person at one point. They were nice, they were helpful, but they're not saved. So that's one of the things that's in the course is the trauma bond workbook. Um,
uh,
that was one of my issues too with him. I knew he was a psychopath, but at the same time, he'd been one of the most helpful people to me, and it was the strangest thing. And it's because
yeah.
he also knew how to activate my empathy. We have an empathy system, and that's why you have to go no contact people if you are with these individuals, because if you are an empathic person, they can activate your compassion system of the brain. And when that happens, it almost erases the bad stuff they do. Your brain just goes,
Oh,
oh, you know what? I'll let it go. I'll let it go,
right.
because that system's so powerful. And so, yeah, that was one of the things I had to, when he was reaching back out to me, I said, no, 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 no. So I blocked the number, everything, because I knew that he could get one sob story, or say, oh, I'm sorry things went down the way they went. And I'd be like, well, okay, you
Yeah,
have to, don't allow that system to be activated. It's a
right.
powerful system.
I heard a story probably 25 years ago about a group in, I think it was South Africa or somewhere in Southern Africa, of when a woman was in an abusive relationship,
Mhm.
her relatives, her sisters or whoever it is, mom, would take her somewhere for about 3 months. Her and the kids, they would just take her somewhere and they wouldn't allow her to have any contact with the abuser.
Wow.
I thought, "What?" Yeah.
Man, I love that. Oh, we could just do that here. It's not like a retreat, like a lockdown retreat. Just go stay.
And
No,
in that 3 months, they get their mind back and they
that's
can see
right. You
clearly.
broke it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I guess we can do our own version of that, but
Yeah.
that just seems like such a wonderful way to get support because 'cause we're not seeing clearly.
Mm-mm. No, you're not. Like, there's actually been studies done. They had people who recently broke up with a boyfriend or girlfriend, and they put them in an fMRI, and it showed that the frontal lobes were like dull in comparison to the reward system, which was super high, which was
Oh,
obviously telling them to stalk the guy, to go get him or get her. So yeah,
yeah, right.
actually
Wow.
neurologically, supported.
Yeah, that was what's going on. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think probably the most interesting thing and most hopeful thing is that our brains can change,
Oh yeah,
not
yeah.
stuck with
Oh
whatever
my
the
gosh.
is. Mhm.
You're so right, because I felt, when I did my traditional psychology, I felt a little bit hopeless for a little bit. So I thought, oh my gosh, am I just unfixable? Like, is this
Right.
me for the rest of my life? Like, how I kept thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to pull this off? Like, how can I just
Yeah.
exist? Existing feels terrible, existing, and of course pain.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
yeah, that was when I just decided, like, I literally sat down myself with paper and pencil, and Rhonda, you do this for a living, like, work with the brain. Why can't you help yourself? Pretend you were a patient. And I had to self distance and say, like, use words like Rhonda,
Yeah.
and wrote down, if she were my client, what would I recommend? And I just wrote a treatment plan for myself. And really big on the top, I wrote activate her prefrontal cortex,
Huh.
because,
Right.
and that was, and I just took it from there. Yeah.
Right. Well, and then if an fMRI shows that dullness, that's
Mhm.
really good evidence that in fact our brain's not working well enough for us to
Yeah.
make those decisions.
Mhm,
We
mhm.
really need to, I think, looking at that, like, what would I say to my client, or what would I say if it was my sister or
Yeah.
my friend or something?
Mhm,
That's a helpful way to look at it.
mhm. It
Yeah,
really is.
yeah.
With different types of narcissists is interestingly what I found. It would often be like one with a narcissist who has very strong histrionic traits. So they're like the life of the party, they are
Mm.
woohoo, hang with me. And they'll wind up with a malignant narcissist who's more about bringing down the hammer of control and coldness and
Oh,
dominance and
mm,
power. They're like the histrionic seems to be histrionic narcissists often attracted to the power of the malignant. And the
mm,
malignant has such horrible social skills that they're attracted to the social skills of the histrionic.
mm.
But often the malignant will hurt the histrionic narcissist. So one of the things I think I want to share before we go is that it's not really possible to have, to make it work with a person on the narcissism spectrum. And I mean the actual disorder. I'm not speaking of someone who may have some features or some traits. I mean the actual true disorder of narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, which is also including psychopathy in that mixture. Because one of the things I get asked, and probably the most common question is, it's thank you for the information, but now can you also give me some tips of how I can just stay in this marriage and how I can make it work with him or make it work with her, without getting damaged by it. And no one can give you those kinds of tips, unfortunately, because our brain it reacts to everything. It's one of the organs that is so responsive to the environment that someone walking in here who is a really warm person, it'll actually make my oxytocin rise and I'll feel good. Someone who walks in here who's a scary person, my brain's going to react again. It's going to put my survival system out front. It's going to make me be careful, vigilant. It's going to be watching that person. I may even feel fear, anxiety. My heart may start racing. So it's a reactive organ. So there's nothing anyone can tell you to make it work to manage its reaction to this kind of person. And so the reward system, not reward system, the stress system getting activated repeatedly can lead to trauma. You know, the experience of trauma can lead to PTSD, complex PTSD. So these individuals can change you. If you are aware of that and you still want to stay, make it work, then at least have that awareness that you will be changed. If you don't want to take that risk and deal with trauma for the rest of your life, then the other option would be then to go. But there's no doctor who's going to tell you, yeah, do these things, you'll be good. There's no way.
So you can't really protect yourself from the damage of being
Mm-mm.
in a relationship like that.
Exactly, because the brain is doing its job. It is telling you this isn't safe, this isn't good, this is going to hurt us in some way. And it perceives emotional pain just like it perceives physical pain. It's not doing a huge differentiation in there. So it doesn't like either one. It's giving you cues like, hey, this is bad. And so it won't be able to manage that because it's just doing its job. And
Right.
on top of it, it gets more sensitive the more times it get activated. I don't know if many of you knew that,
Oh,
but you'll start off at one sensitivity level, and the more times you are insulted and hurt and harmed or in fear, walking on eggshells, or dealing with a rant or narcissistic rage or whatever you have to deal with, each time your sensitivity, stress system rather, becomes more sensitive, a little more sensitive, a little more sensitive. So then it takes very little to set you off emotionally for you to feel like freaked out or stressed out. So it
ooh.
actually, yeah, it almost has like a shelf life. It's like so much it can take before it starts getting more and more and more sensitive.
Right, right. And then it would just take that look or a tone of voice, or
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a rage or a
No.
nasty thing. It could
Mm-mm.
just be that,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
It'll change you. That's the one thing that's hard to revert back to normal, I will say, after narcissistic abuse. That's the thing I never got back. No matter what I have done to work on my brain. I've been working on my brain for a decade. And I never could change this. I changed the sensitivity a little bit because now I'm not as reactive. Because right after the relationship, I couldn't listen to music because it was just too much. I couldn't play music for an entire year. I couldn't dance. I couldn't nothing. I was just like,
Mhm.
frozen.
Mm.
But and that changed, but not tremendously. Like I'm still very, very sensitive to the pain of other people. If I hear an animal being harmed or anything, like I will just bawl into tears. I've got to do something about it. I've got to help. Whereas before I could, that definitely upset me, but I was like, I was stronger to be able to, oh, I'll handle this. Whereas now I fall apart about something like that. I can't handle it. It's just it upsets me too much. So that you won't get back once the amygdala gets turned to a certain sensitivity level, and the insula, because that's the brain system that handles our pain. When those two things
Mhm.
in combination become really sensitive, they don't tend to revert back.
Oh.
Yeah,
Mm.
I
So people
wish.
can do a lot. I wish, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So people could do a lot to improve things, and in
Hmm.
terms of who we have in our lives and good boundaries and those kinds of things.
Oh
But there are
yeah.
some things we'll always have to be
Mhm.
more careful about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's anything that I know now that have like really strong boundaries, is because I think to myself, I didn't work all this, hard for this person to to pull me back. So I have boundaries even just for that reason. I get like a little bit indignant, like, are you kidding me? Like I
Yeah.
said, no. you know,
Well, that's good.
not sitting in front of a bunch of video games for another 2 years for you, buddy.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really
Oh,
fun and
it has
interesting,
been good.
and
Thank
yeah,
you.
I'm glad that we could do this.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
You can reach Dr. Rhonda Freeman at neuroinstincts.com. Welcome to the 2021 Radical Recovery Summit, presented by the Kiloby Center for Recovery. This is Lynn Fraser, your moderator. This year, our theme is Feel It, Heal It, a new paradigm of recovery, featuring a diverse group of thought leaders and innovators people who are working on the ground in the new field of addiction recovery. Go to radicalrecoverysummit.com to sign up and watch free.